Good morning, everybody. If people could find their seats, it's just gone 11:30, so we should kick off. Thank you, everybody. I'm Jeremy Newmark. I'm the chair of the Growth Board, and I will be chairing this morning's meeting. I'd like to welcome everybody to Hertsmere. This meeting of the Hertfordshire Growth Board will be webcast live on the internet and will also be recorded and published on the council's website. All parts of the room can be seen or heard by the camera or microphones, and any members of the press and public present in the room at any time during the meeting are likely to be included in the webcast. Should the fire alarm sound, the fire exits are located on either side of the chamber. Please do not use the lift and assemble outside in the roundabout at the corner of the car park. Hearing devices for anybody requiring them are available at the top table. I have apologies from Councillor Richard Roberts, who will be substituted for the purposes of this meeting only by Councillor Steve Wortley, the Deputy Executive Member for Sustainable Economic Growth at Hertfordshire County Council. And I believe there are no other apologies or substitutions this morning. Members' interest, can I remind members to declare any disclosable pecuniary interests or declarable interests either now or at the relevant point in the agenda? I don't see any declarations. Friends, this is the first formal Growth Board meeting of 2025. To wish everybody a happy new year. It's certainly going to be an interesting and a busy new year for local government. There's been a flurry of new policies and directions emerging from central government, particularly in the 10 days before we all disappeared for the Christmas holidays. Those include the new MPPF, new housing numbers and targets, as well as the English devolution white paper. Government's made it clear that their number one priority is to drive growth, and we in Hertfordshire are already making a significant contribution to that national mission. Whilst conversations on Hertfordshire's response to the devolution white paper are underway, particularly in relation to the local government reorganisation dimension of that white paper, we at the Growth Board will continue to maintain our focus on the delivery of our key missions, whilst at the same time inputting into those conversations through the prism of the economic growth that we all strive to deliver and fuel across the county. Today's meeting will start with an overview of our ambitions here in Hertsmere on growth as related to the key Growth Board missions. We'll then move on to the first of two deep dives, starting with the Right Homes, Right Places mission, with an update from Julia from Homes England, before leader of St Albans City, Councillor de Court, and Colin Hay, Director of Place and Growth and Place at the County Council, talks us through plans, priorities and progress for that particular mission group. And I know we've all had an incredibly rich and extensive set of slides with an immense amount of data and evidence well in advance of this meeting, so that should be a fascinating discussion. At this point, I would also like to welcome my colleague Councillor Matthews, who is our Housing Portfolio Officer on the Cabinet here at Hertsmere, who's joined us particularly for that item. We'll then have a second deep dive relating to our Healthy and Safe Places mission, which will be led by Paul Burstow as chair of the Herts and West Essex ICB, and Ben Martin, the Associate Director of Planning, Infrastructure and Economy at Watford Borough Council. And at this note, I've been told that Ben is also substituting for Donna Nolan, who has sent her apologies to this meeting. And I've also just been given apologies from Jeff Stack, who will be substituted by Sandra Beck. Farouk will then be taking us through our draft budget proposals for 25-26. It's hard to believe we've already reached that time of the year again, as well as the proposal for her own replacement before our last agenda item, which will be our much awaited but critical advocacy and communications plan. I'm sure members are already aware of our parliamentary reception, which we've discussed on a couple of occasions. We've now set a date for the 6th of February. We've had quite a stunning response already to our invitations. This is going to provide us as the Growth Board with that long-awaited opportunity to demonstrate how we're delivering the jobs, the homes and fueling the skills that we need here in Hertfordshire, and will help us to realise our vision for good growth. And I think it will also be totemic of the journey that we have all undertaken over the past 18 months in particular, to go through the process of defining our vision and our strategy, setting that out, and now to actually move to action stations, a key stage of which will be setting that out to parliamentarians, ministers and hopefully secretaries of state at that important reception. So without further ado, we'll move straight on to the formal agenda items, asking the board to note the minutes of our previous meeting held on the 17th of July 2024, which were previously circulated with the papers. Is that agreed? I'll sign the minutes after the meeting to save time. Item 2, public questions. There are none. Item 3 is public petitions. Similarly, we have no petitions this morning. Item number 4 is the spotlight, the local spotlight on Hertsmere Borough Council's growth ambitions and priorities. As members will be aware, the host council does one of these overviews at the start of each meeting, and I'm really delighted to hand over to our Head of Planning and Economic Development, Ross Weir, who will be presenting. Over to you, Ross.
Thank you, Councillor Newmark, and good morning, everybody. So I've been asked this morning just to share a spotlight on Hertsmere, its growth ambitions and achievements thus far. First of all, just picking up a bit about Hertsmere the place, and I thought it was just interesting as we celebrate our 50th anniversary of the creation of Hertsmere. Hertsmere was coined for the district combining a common abbreviation of Hertfordshire, as in Herts, and the archaic word for boundary. And I guess that really reflects where Hertsmere sits in terms of Hertfordshire being right on the edge of London, bordering 3 London boroughs. So we have 4 main settlements: Bushy, Borehamwood, Radlett and Potters Bar, at a population of around about 110,000 as of last year. 36.9% are from an ethnic minority, and we have a very significant Jewish population. I think it's one of the largest in the country, if not the largest. We have some real challenges around pay and house prices. As you can see, the median pay there is just over 27,000, with average house prices of just close to 500,000, which is nearly 17 times values, which is significantly a challenge for delivering homes and for making sure that people are able to afford homes in the borough. We rank 224 out of 317 in terms of lower tier authorities for deprivation. And we have 20% of adults that state they are physically inactive. We do have some fantastic, excellent north-south rail and road connections into London, both King's Cross and St Pancras, as well as the M25, which runs east-west through the borough as well, and the A414 that runs to the north of that. The majority of the borough is within the green belt, just under 80%, and we are a real hub for creative industries. I'm sure you're all aware of Elstree Studios, Sky Studios Elstree, and the things that they're delivering and creating at the moment. And we're also a general hub for other major employers as well within the county. So just a bit of a focus on the placemaking, and we have set out a very clear vision as to how we want to deliver growth, ensuring that residents are in close proximity to jobs, daily amenities and recreational opportunities. And some of those priorities come through sustainable development, so obviously securing the right growth in the right places, promoting mixed use and efficient developments, making the best use of the land that we have, creating places for all, and then valuing and delivering that infrastructure ahead of new development. Obviously, as we've said about the housing difficulties, is ensuring that we deliver a minimum of 9,400 homes by 2040. That will obviously increase as part of the new NPPF that was published in December, with a focus on affordable and social housing. And we're in the process of delivering some really good affordable housing schemes at the moment, both as a borough, but also seeing schemes come through committee at 50% affordable housing plus, including one scheme in Borough at 75%. So really, really positive in that respect. And then, as it says there, about the potential still to deliver a new settlement at Bowman's Cross of around 5,000 homes, which is to the north of the borough. In terms of economic growth, obviously supporting local businesses, which we do through our economic development team, and capitalising on the creative industries through the creative strategy and various other means. Growth on innovative and resilient economy, and helping future workforces match that economy, so ensure we've got the skills and the workforce that can actually continue to keep the economy moving. And then obviously the environmental protection side of things, so reducing greenhouse gas emissions, enhancing and protecting biodiversity, and expanding our green and blue infrastructure network. And as many authorities did, we did declare a climate emergency in 2019 and adopted our strategy and action plan in 2020, which we're about to start to update and to reflect on. So, as I said, home to a number of international businesses, and just a few of them highlighted here. So, Sky Studios Elstree, who are now located on the edge of Borough Wood. They've got 12 sound stages and have enabled £3 billion worth of production investment in the first 5 years. They've already filmed the 2 Wicked films there, Paddington, Lost in Peru, and also the new Jurassic World film. So it's quite a lot of high-profile stuff going on at the studios, which is really positive. Leonardo Helicopters, based in Belgium, but have opened up a new investment and technology hub or will be opening up a hub at Elstree Aerodrome. And that's a really fantastic investment into the local aeronautics industry. The Fujitsu company are based in Elstree at Centennial Park, which is one of our flagship kind of industrial estates. And they're obviously doing air conditioning units, but also pioneering heat pumps locally in our move to net zero. We've also got Bioproducts Laboratory, which do supply high-quality plasma-derived medicines globally. They've actually renamed themselves Kedrion following an acquisition about a year or two ago, but they're still very much present and looking to invest in their future within the borough, which is really positive. InfoPlus Technologies, so it's an IT company focused on building products, services, staffing, and digital transformation. BBC Elstree, so obviously the BBC Elstree Studios, which is now kind of been partly split, and part of that will potentially be coming forward for redevelopment following acquisition by Oxygen Studios. But the EastEnders set is very much safe and will continue to be leased to BBC so they can continue producing the show. And then obviously Elstree Studios, which was purchased by the council back in 1996 for £2 million, it says there, and renovated with 2 new studios, which were the award-winning Platinum stages, which have also been used for a number of high-profile events as well. Some other recent achievements. So we are progressing work on our new local plan, with ongoing discussions with many of the stakeholders that we need to, including the County Council and various other infrastructure providers. We've got a number of major developments which are also going through the system at the moment on some really significant both kind of housing schemes but also other schemes. We've got a huge data centre proposal which is coming to committee tomorrow night, and obviously we're hoping that that will be follow officer recommendation and be approved by the members. We've implemented a new and updated community safety plan, developed a new physical activity and wellbeing strategy, and as I said, we've advanced affordable housing schemes throughout Hertsmere through Hertsmere Development Limited and Hertsmere Living Limited, and that scheme on the top right there is Clarendon Road scheme, which was completed last year. We are continuing engagement with local businesses, and just a few highlights. We're in the third year of our Generation Hertsmere scheme, which has allowed 700 students to come and meet over a course of a day, meet over 58 businesses and look at career opportunities across a whole range of sectors. This last year was we did an environmental kind of focus where lots of the businesses were looking at their sustainability and how people can get into those kind of careers, and that's been a real positive experience and really good for the council to kind of showcase what opportunities are around in Hertsmere. Working with Communities First and as part of the UK Shared Prosperity Fund to set up new jobs clubs in Potters Bar, an innovative initiative borough-wide to help support residents over 45 looking to return to work. Also through the UK SPF, we've also done some community wealth building programmes, which has brought jobs for just over nearly 140 people locally, which again is really positive. And we've worked closely with the DWP on that in Borough. We also have quarterly networking events as well as specialist events where we get attendance of around 100 local businesses, and we usually get speakers in for a whole range of things, and giving advice to local businesses on things like funding, the path to net zero and many other things as well, and they've been really, really positively received. So in terms of local plan, so we did consult on a Regulation 18 local plan back in 2024. As it says there, that was seeking a 40% reduction in Greenbelt allocation from the previous plan in 2021 and proposed a delivery of about 9,500 homes. Obviously, the new NPPF in December has slightly shifted that focus. We've now got a 30% increase in housing numbers, so that increases to just over 1,000 a year. I know many of the other Hertfordshire authorities are in the same boat. So our refocus is very much now on town centre regeneration, and pushing towards how we can kind of focus on brownfield site development in the town centres as part of a bigger placemaking thing, not just delivering homes but more broadly as well. And that obviously enables us to preserve as much of the green belt as possible and the valuable green spaces that the borough has. So moving on, just in terms of other economic development, we're continuing investment in Elstree Studios, developing a Hertsmere screen tourism offer, and again, through the UK SPF, we've been providing a wraparound for employment support, feasibility studies for Film and TV Heritage Centre, which we hope to kind of deliver in Borough, supporting voluntary and community sector grants, and then we've also developed a cultural and creative strategy. I won't read the quote out on there, but obviously it shows that how Hertsmere is one of the main hubs for creative sector in the well, not just in Hertfordshire but across the country. And we've partnered with Elstree Screen Arts Academy, which is based in Borough, to complete documentaries celebrating the studios. And it says there 40 students aged 15 to 18 from the academy made documentaries over 2 years. So moving on to environmental protection, so we've been investing in our parks, including just over £1 million of community infrastructure levy funding to support improvements to the Green Flag awarded King George's Park. We've also been working on a continued programme of park improvements, including new wildlife and nature themed play areas in Oakmere Park in Potters Bar. On the climate change side, we say we've got a new strategy and investment in electric vehicle charging, and that was part of the kind of cross-county work on the Levi funding, which has obviously been really helpful, and we've got commitments to achieve zero carbon net zero by 2050, and we're working very closely with the Hertfordshire Climate Change and Sustainability Partnership. We're also one of the early adopters of biodiversity net gain through supplementary planning documents, and we've already achieved a number of schemes where we've achieved at least 10%, if not more, on development. And we're in the process of just firming up Section 106 agreements for 2 habitat banks within the borough as well, which means that any off-site biodiversity net gain is kept within Hertsmere. So just wrapping up really, the future outlook, we're committed to balancing the growth needs but also making sure that we focus on environmental protection, sustainable development, and ensuring that the benefits from growth goes to all the communities within the area, whilst preserving the borough's unique character. And on that note, thank you very much for listening. And I'll hand back to Councillor Newmark.
Thank you very much, Ross. We will now go straight into the first of our 2 deep dive sessions, which is Right Homes, Right Places, the snappy title for our housing mission. And I think Julie is our first presenter on this. Julia, sorry, are you going to present from there or here?
Yeah, I can come up to there. We've got the Homes England slide is sort of slotted in as part of the pack. You can skip past it, just a sec. I will talk without the slide, but you'll see it later on. What we thought would be helpful into wider context to the Right Homes, Right Places piece was a little bit about what the role of the agency is, what the direction we're getting from the new government is, and kind of the impact that might have on the work that Colin and others are doing. There's quite a bit been happening for the agency, and some of which you may well be following. So we've had a busy start to the year. We had a new chief executive last week, Eamon Boylan, who's joined us from Manchester City Council. So he's very much getting his feet under the table and getting going at the moment. We will also have a new chair at some point during the course of this year. Back in September, we had a very clear chair's letter. So our chair, Peter Freeman, it's a public letter. So for any of you that haven't seen it, it's well worth looking at. We received a letter from the Housing Minister which explained what the government was looking to see from Homes England and how it was looking for us to support on its key missions around housing and growth. It is very clear that the agency needs to use and it actually says you need to use all of the tools you have at your disposal to try and unlock housing growth. That is through to work towards the housing target of 1.5 million homes during this Parliament. That includes supporting the work of the New Towns Task Force. It talks about a real priority around delivering social housing. It talks about supporting the work of the New Homes Accelerator, which we're doing, alongside a lot of the work that we're already doing in our grant programs and our other funding programs to really keep driving that growth. So that is one part of it, and there's a very clear letter that sort of helpfully talks about how we need to do that and how we design what comes next by way of our funding programs to support in the best way possible growth across England. Councillor Newmark mentioned the devolution white paper. The devolution white paper, for any of you that have read it, also talks quite a bit about the role of the agency, particularly with mayoral strategic authorities, and the ability for those authorities to develop pipelines for delivery around key sites. The way it works is effectively we agree a shared pipeline of sites for delivery with mayoral strategic authorities, and that enables us to really support locally. And the devolution white paper talks about how Homes England will sort of organise itself to support that to be more regionally focused. Obviously, in my role, I'm focused on the South East, and within my wider team, we have regionally focused roles, and so we're very much looking to support, not to tell everyone how to do things, but actually to help join things up. Some of that is around our convening powers, some of that is around our ability just to join things up, join up conversations, as well as our existing and hopefully future funding programmes, whether that be through affordable housing grant or other access to finance as well. So we're very much here to support that growth. We're here to help work with you all to understand what you need, where you need it, and how best to support you. But this is very much about us being led by your vision and what you'd like to see locally. Hopefully, I don't know, is Colin or Councillor DeCourt, are you coming after me? I don't know who's coming next. But any questions before I stop? Silence. Good. Thank you very much.
Yeah, I thought I'd do this for here because I'm just introducing this, and Colin, I'm sure, will go up to the presentation area. So Herts Growth Board has rightly identified housing as one of its key missions, as the lack of it is seen as a substantial constraint on growth. We all understand the housing challenges that we face in the county. We've got ambitious targets set by government to help solve the national housing crisis, which leads to concerns about building across the Green Belt, not enough affordable homes, etc. You're all familiar with that. I think we all accept it's not about building houses whatever the cost, but it's about building the right homes in the right places, hence our use of that phrase. And what we're looking to do at this session is to spend time diving into the issues and having a debate about the ways we might tackle some of the problems at our level. And there are 4 obvious goals that we have in mind, that is building more social and affordable housing, as well as specialist homes. And that's given that our councils have numerous duties to look after those most in need in this area, be it families on our long housing waiting lists, those who find themselves in the horrible position of being homeless, and vulnerable children and adults who look to us for housing support. The second goal is to highlight a pipeline of development sites, Julia's referred to that, so that we can work with developers, Homes England and other bodies to help bring them forward at a fast pace. Thirdly, to make sure that every home is well designed and as sustainable as possible, as this will contribute to one of the other missions to create healthy and safe places, which we're going to hear more about later. Fourth and finally, to think about the long term through the preparation of joint strategic plans or a spatial development strategy so that the best locations for growth and infrastructure can be put forward. Obviously, I hope you find this session helpful and that we can identify some tangible actions to help tackle the housing problems we're all facing. The questions I'd like you to consider during Colin's presentation are whether we are showing the appropriate level of ambition, whether there are any other actions we can take to push the housing agenda even further.
Thanks, Paul. Colin, you...
I am going to stay here, if that's all right, if that's a problem to anyone. It means I can see the slides at a decent distance. Right, thank you very much all. So, as you've heard, 4 goals to this mission. One is about what we need to build, one is about the delivery, one is about the quality and the sustainability, and one is about the right places for that development. So, all issues we are tackling at the moment. The graphs, you don't necessarily need to worry too much about the detail of the numbers, because I guess you can all anticipate what I am going to tell you in the broadest sense. But these are the challenges we know we all face. So this graph shows the delivery of housing in Hertfordshire over the last 20 years. For the first time, the year just gone, we broke the 5,000 home barrier, so that is the most houses we have built in slightly over 20 years. You can see the average, that orange line, so that is what we are generally achieving with the local plans, with the planning system, with the policies we all have in place at the moment. That is exactly the same slide, but now with the purple line showing what the MPPF would like us to do collectively. So that is slightly over 10,000 houses a year, so we are being asked to double our delivery rate from this year onwards, essentially. So it is a monumental task, as I'm sure we all appreciate, but seeing it like that can be quite stark. The government publishes a housing delivery test every year. This is based upon the old MPPF, but you can see how some of the areas are faring at the moment based upon planning permissions granted, homes built, local plans, etc. So the challenge is there for all of us to contemplate. And if you look to the future, if we were looking at strategic planning to 2050, you can see the different scenarios that might arise. The orange line is what we would do if we carried on at the average rate. I think that's about 100,000 houses. The blue line is what our current local plans say, so I've added them all together for their time periods and taken an annual average. It's about 6,500 homes a year from memory. That delivers us about 160,000 homes. The purple line is the MPPF. If we were project it forward for 25 years, now it will change because the government will change the method, but that comes out at 250,000 houses. Bear in mind there's about 500,000 houses in Hertfordshire at the moment, so it's half as much again in a very short window of time when you look at it like that. So there are challenges ahead. And this is the affordability ratio for Hertfordshire. So this is the ratio of average earnings to average house prices. We started at 6 times salary back in 2000. We are now at about 12 times average salary, 20 odd years later. Again, that orange line shows what the ONS suggest is an affordable threshold, what people can generally afford. And you've heard from Ross a few minutes ago that Hertsmere is up to 17 times, and I think St Albans and various other places go even higher than that. There is nowhere in Hertfordshire that falls below that 5% ONS threshold. We're above it in all cases. So, a few other facts to go with that. If you look at the waiting lists of all the districts, we have about 18,500 households on those waiting lists. 5,000 households owed a duty in terms of homelessness. 1,300 households in temporary accommodation, and 2/3 of those have children. And apparently we spent £16 million collectively on dealing with homelessness and temporary accommodation last year. And you can only presume that number will keep going up without some sort of intervention. And over at the County Council, we are expecting that we need to build about 800 supported living homes for the children and the adults that we have a duty to care for as well. So you can see those implications for us, regardless of what housing target we might be tasked with, but looking at the social side of this as well. So some growth consequences. As I've said, we're doing about 72% of what the government wanted us to do. I suspect that number is lower now the MPPF has been published with higher targets. Our local plans collectively have about 120,000 homes in them based upon allocated sites. So we will see those coming forward over the next 10 to 15 years. Last year we averaged about 30% affordable housing across the county, so that might yield us 36,000 affordable houses, subject to how hard we argue with developers and all the rest of it that comes through the planning system. You might recall, some of you, we did a Hertfordshire infrastructure prospectus about 5 years ago. If you project those numbers forward to 2050, looking at the housing numbers that we've got in mind, we're looking at least £14 billion of infrastructure, but that's for the ticking over type stuff. That's for the schools and the roads. If we are needing bigger bits of kit, new sewage works, heat networks, power supply, major transport projects, then you can expect that number to go up. And then there are the wider socio-economic implications of all of this. We can all anticipate that high house prices perpetuate the cost of living because there isn't the money available for other things. It harms our productivity. People aren't able to move here to pursue the job opportunities we have in bioscience and creative industries and the other sectors we would like to grow and create. And we would like to be able to balance those jobs with the opportunity to come and live here. There are wider societal costs, and various studies I've been looking at recently that give very large numbers as to what the potential benefits might be of more housing generally, more social housing, and tackling some of those problems. And as Julia's covered, we have the New Homes England priorities and their desire to work with us to help tackle some of these problems. So this is my transition slide from the doom and gloom and where does this line stop to, right, what can we practically do about some of these sort of things. So you can see Homes England and the government behind them beginning to say how they would like to help tackle this problem, how they would like to see local authorities tackle this problem and begin to intervene in some of these challenges. And that's what this group has been doing with colleagues. So Councillor Allen and Councillor Portercourt have been leading us with Anthony and Claire as our CEOs, and we have built an officer team from the county, from districts, from Homes England, from the university, from housing associations. So we're bringing together a team that know this subject and can hopefully make genuinely tangible interventions in it all. And this is some of the work we've come up with and where we would like to go over the course of this year. So the first goal is about social, affordable and specialist housing. We've talked about the lack of supply, the affordability, the waiting list, etc. We know now that the NPPF would like new sites to deliver 50% affordable housing, so that will hopefully see an increase on those sites coming forward, subject to the negotiations with developers, and we will start seeing an increase in the number of affordable houses we are building. And as I've said, if we manage that, it could be of the order of 36,000. What we've started hearing is some councils where they are looking at their own land holdings, they are now adopting partnership delivery models, so as well as selling on the market, also forming partnerships with housing associations and those that know the market to help bring those sites forward to realise their value. We've been doing the one public estate for some time. There is maps of all the public sector land we own in Hertfordshire, and where opportunities arise, we have that ability to look and see whether there is council land that aligns with NHS land that might align with other public sector land, and we can therefore make best use of that rather than doing it individually. And that leads to the point about the one knowledge point, using Herts Property Partnership and the Herts Heads of Housing groups that already exist. We don't need to create these. Our colleagues are already liaising and working together. We can make sure that when sites are coming forward, we're looking for the best opportunity rather than doing this unilaterally and each partner in this room working separately. So we hope that will begin to identify opportunities and begin to put together a list, which is the second goal. So we know there are sites that aren't coming forward for various reasons or another. I presented this to Councillor DeCourt and said there's a variety of reasons, and he said it usually relates to funding and money, doesn't it, Colin? And that probably is the answer in most cases. Most of these problems can be solved with cash. It's where we get that, how we make that work. So there's this opportunity to work much more closely with Homes England and therefore through to the government, looking at future funding pots that might come out through those routes. Some of you will already have the burden of producing an action plan on the back of the housing delivery test, so can we see what those say? How can we collectively take those forward? And what we would like to do is create a pipeline of sites, public sector and private sector, that we think are particularly important to the county because they've been intractable for a number of years, because they're big sites that will yield a lot of housing, they have some wider value to us delivering them. And we can use that site to lobby, to promote, to talk to government, to challenge developers, to unlock wherever we want to. And one of the other tasks with the introduction of the grey belt in the NPPF is can we begin to look at where those sites might be and whether we think we can bring some of those forward. And I'm sure developers will be talking to districts where they believe they have a grey belt site already. The third goal is about making sure we are building high quality and sustainable. When we do build those homes, I think there's a general view that building regulations by the government set a low bar at the moment. There are many of us that would like to push that further. We tried that with the Development Quality Charter that the Growth Board published a year and a half ago. Only 3 developers have signed that. It's disappointing. I hope there'd be more. I think all of us near enough in the room have signed that charter and are applying it, but the development industry wasn't willing to do that voluntarily. They weren't willing to make that commitment. So we might need to think again about how we do that. There is the duty to prepare local design codes coming up for all of us. There is the proposal from certainly the previous government that they would update building regulations, and we can keep talking to our colleagues at CLG to see whether that is happening and whether we can lobby for that to happen and quite what standard that would impose upon developers. And then we have the opportunity to update the charter and to consider whether it remains a voluntary agreement or whether we incorporate it into the planning system somehow to demand it. We also have the opportunity here to link with the Healthy Places Working Group, who are looking at a Healthy Places framework and whether there is some overlap about the design of homes, the sustainability of homes, and the wider design of our communities and how they can all work together. So we don't want to lose that potential opportunity. Final goal is joint strategic plans, but let's just call it looking at the long term beyond the length of a current local plan. Legislation's not quite there yet, but likely to be coming. We are working on joint strategic plans for the North East and the South West already, but it's how much resource we want to put into that when we're also doing local plans. We know they're expensive and there are certain rules about what they can and can't do. The devolution white paper may be instructive in this as to what happens over the next couple of years. We've put ourselves forward to be a trailblazer to the government. We'd like to carry on that conversation. We are also tasked with working on an economic plan, a local transport plan and a local nature recovery strategy, and you can see the opportunity to bring all of those together and have that long-term view. And we're also working on an infrastructure prospectus that captures all of our knowledge about what we need to go alongside growth to understand the costs, the complexities and the opportunities associated with that. But I think the big point is we can look to 2050 or whatever date we want and say, this problem probably isn't going away. Where are the best places to build? Do we carry on the same theme of building around existing towns, one field at a time, plus the odd big site we have in Hertfordshire? Or now is the time to think about new settlements? Will the government be identifying new settlements for us? How do we get into that debate and have that long-term plan? So that forms the way we'd like to do this. A pipeline of sites, more liaison on projects people are taking forward so we make sure we're making the best opportunity. There was something that came to this board a few years ago, a Housing First initiative looking at temporary accommodation that I'd like to at least revive to have a look at and see if that's still the right thing to do, and looking at the future of the Charter, whether it becomes an SPD, how we incorporate it into the planning system to hold developers to account. And then just to let you know, there has been some money available from the Growth Board to progress some of these. So we had a few ideas. The one that has been successful is the top one, the infrastructure prospectus. So we have some money to progress that. The county would like to work with all of the districts, the NHS, other bodies to incorporate all of that information into it. It becomes a database we all own that's all available to inform our plans, to inform our liaison with government, with other funding agencies, utilities, companies, etc. That is me. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Colin, and particular thanks to Councillor DeCourt and Councillor Allen for your leadership on the housing mission. I think it's quite clear that I think we call these deep dives part of our progress monitoring arrangements, but there's a vast amount of progress that's been made in a tremendously fast period of time. We have some recommendations in the report to approve, but at this point, having had that very fulsome presentation and had the data in advance, even if the purple lines are sources of nightmares for many of us, I think that it's time to open this item to discussion. And if I can ask people to focus on, obviously all questions are welcome, but particular focus on the role that the board itself can play in driving progress with this mission. That's really what we're being asked to consider. Peter.
Thanks, Jeremy, and thanks for the presentation. Just a few points to pick up. I'm sure Ben will correct me if I'm wrong, but the figure that was given for Watford for the housing delivery test was actually not correct. So the government gave the wrong data, so it's not 120%, it's 97%, so we're still fairly close. I mean, one thing that is a fundamental cause of the housing crisis in Hertfordshire and across the UK is the dominance of a few very large developers. And an oligopoly market. Is the stuff that we can do at Hertfordshire level to support smaller, medium-sized developers to have more competition in that market? Because I think unless we address some of the fundamental causes of the housing crisis, we're sort of, we're dealing with symptoms rather than causes. So I would be interested to know if the group has looked at that and if there's more that we could do in that area. The other thing was just on the quality charter. It said in the report that only 3 developers have signed it, which is, a disappointingly small number. So I'm just wondering, have we looked into why it's such a small number of developers that have signed it, and are we confident that we can increase that figure? And the final thing was just on Housing First. I know that for a number of years we've had a Housing First policy, and in Watford that's proved relatively successful. I'm sure that other districts have also done it. I know that you mentioned it in here, so I'm just wondering what is actually the plan in relation to Housing First, because all the evidence is that it's a success. As I say, we're doing it already in some parts of the county, so what is the thinking in relation to that?
Thanks. Any further questions or comments at this stage? Ben, I'll try and take these in threes.
Thanks very much. I think what Mayor Taylor said, you made a good point about how do we encourage those smaller builders. And I think as your presentation said, Colin, developers don't always deliver high quality, sustainable homes or build out at speed, do they? One of the things that the Growth Board was looking at previously before our refresh was off-site construction, and I think that work programme fell away when we did the refresh, and it just seems that some of the challenges that we face could be addressed through that particular route, and so I wonder whether there's a potential to revisit that as part of a solution. Just throwing it out there.
Thank you. Anybody? Jonathan.
Thanks, Jeremy. Just a couple of points from me. I was really interested and pleased that Lady from Homes England was here. In my past life as a council leader in Sussex, one of the things that was really critical was around the role of Homes England in unlocking sites and addressing the point that Mayor Taylor was making around developers controlling delivery, and actually Homes England being a really key partner, in my experience, for actually acquiring stuck sites, difficult sites in terms of infrastructure burdens, and actually really forcing the pace of delivery that better meets the affordability needs rather than perhaps the commercial interest of developers. I think that, based on my past experiences, is a really critical point. And then just a smaller point, just to flag, particularly in the context of the infrastructure prospectus work, is that policing has not previously asked for infrastructure contributions in Hertfordshire. I've commissioned work to change that, and so I'd just be really keen to just link that in with the infrastructure prospectus work, because as city policing is missing out quite considerably on some of the capital infrastructure that should be coming into policing that at the moment isn't in Hertfordshire, that we just need to make a bit of a change of approach on. So be really keen to link in with that work as well, Colin, if that's all right.
Thank you. So we've got Peter's points about supporting SME developers, lack of developer sign up on the quality charter and the reasons behind it, and Housing First. We had Ben's point on off-site construction and perhaps revisiting that, and Jonathan's point on unlocking site delivery and the infrastructure contributions. Who's going to take these?
Would you like me to respond to all of those, Chair? Would you like me to respond to all of them or take some of them away? I'm happy to do either.
Well, why don't you give us an initial response?
Okay, all right. Certainly the small developer point, I think the way the government has looked at this and the way we could look at this is by making sure we're allocating a mix of sites, so we're not just proposing large strategic sites that would attract the big developers, but if we have small sites, urban sites, that will hopefully create a better balance of developer opportunity. So they have the choice, and we can support through other ways. Housing First, it's not something I'm familiar with, but if districts are already implementing it, then I'll make sure I talk to those, get their experience of how it's going, whether it is something that should be county-wide or whether it's left to the choice of each district depending on their circumstance. Off-site construction, Councillor Crystal, as you said, there was a piece of work done last year that set that up. I will find out more. I was involved at the time. I know there was an aspiration to build factories in Hertfordshire to provide that. I don't know if there has been as much interest as we hoped. I know it's been incorporated into some of the other guidance, and it could be incorporated into the charter or whatever the charter became, for example, to try and push that agenda. So absolutely, we can look at experience elsewhere in the country. I know, student accommodation particularly is built in that manner, so whether it would work for other housing in Hertfordshire, particularly if we're looking at specific need groups. Very happy to capture the capital infrastructure point in the prospectus, and I'll come and talk to you about that if that's all right. And then the charter, yes, it would be lovely if we could get more developers to sign up to it. When we adopted it, I went to speak to a number of developers, and what they wanted was concessions within the planning system. So they wanted the guarantee of fast-track determination of their application, or they wanted to guarantee that it would be determined by officers going to planning committee. I thought you wouldn't be happy with me if I signed you all up to some of those concessions, so I left that. But that was what the industry wanted in response. So it's something we can talk about if we would like to offer them those concessions, or if we don't think they're fair, which is what your heads of planning generally said to me when I posed it, then we should look at other ways at holding them to account. The easiest way would be to get the building regulations updated so it is a responsibility on every developer to build to that standard, and we can be happy that Hertfordshire's getting the best it can. If not, it's probably planning policy where we hold them to account and have the ability to say yes or no to their schemes on the back of it. But happy to take all those points away back to the group and come back with suggestions.
Thank you for that.
Would it be possible for me to just sort of jump
Please.
in from a national perspective as well, because I think they are all very relevant, for us as well. So on the SME point, that is one of our KPIs. I'll come back to acquisitions, but we acquire sites with an intention for SMEs as well as the larger house builders as well. So that's very much a diverse market is really important and something we're looking at. So we can probably join some dots there. Likewise, speed of construction, on-site, off-site construction and capacity in the market is something we're looking very carefully at as well. We are, in talking about all tools at our disposal, we look at a blend of interventions, as we call them, that we can make. Some of those might be grant funding, it might be loan, it might be a blend of the two, it might be equity. We've got set up and announced relatively recently a number of joint ventures which are intended to sort of support the market as well. And we do acquire land, so we have a lot of legacy land. Those of you in the room with new towns will know that we own sort of have a lot of legacy land through that, but we do also acquire land where there's strategic reasons for us to do so. So that is one of the tools amongst others that we have. So I can pick that up directly with Colin and team as well.
Thank you. I see Stephen's hand.
Thank you, Jeremy. And thank you for the presentation. I suppose a couple of pointers rather than, or comments more than anything else. And it's come up locally, certainly. The term affordable housing is a technical term. You try and explain that to the public. They really do not understand it because it doesn't actually mean the houses are affordable unless they're at social market rent, and they're the only ones that potentially are affordable. It doesn't mean your £500,000 house you can buy for £300,000 because that won't be the case, and that's if you can even get a £500,000 house in Three Rivers. I think in terms of the housing numbers we're facing here, my view certainly is a combination obviously of increasing sites, but actually it is a new town. Effectively we do need to be looking at that very seriously for Hertfordshire. In terms of getting the numbers of 10,000 a year built, you're not going to achieve that with just building out individual communities, 500 here, 600 there, and so on. The other issue, and perhaps it does need to be addressed with developers and indeed central government, a large number of residents, although not all, would be much happier if they could know or have guaranteed the infrastructure was going to be in place. And in Three Rivers we have many examples where health centres, schools are promised as part of developments and are not built. The housing's built and still no schools, still no health centres. And I know there's issues there because obviously although we can allocate a site to have a health centre, it's required in terms of the trust, in terms of funding it. And in schools, we're reliant on the county council to say, actually, this is where we need the school and this is what will be allocated. And I've got one in my own patch, site allocated 10 years ago, still not built. And residents aren't particularly amused by that. So they see these as examples. Well, these developers will promise these things, but it will never get done. So what's the point? And I think that's what's got to change. In terms of fast-tracking planning applications, I think we need to push back very clearly that actually what we want are detailed planning applications, not outline at stage one. And that makes it faster for the planning committees and members to do. And easily it gives some assurance that what is being proposed is going to be delivered. And you know, the idea of an outline application, oh yeah, we'll look at these things, and then 6 months down the line it gets changed because you've got the in-principle permission, really hacks residents off. Oh, well, I thought it was going to be this, and now you've changed it from 500 homes to 700 homes because you've got outline permission. So it needs to be detailed up front, and perhaps that's where we could consider some fast-tracking, in my view. The one thing I would like to have seen in these slides is how much of this potential growth was going to be on brownfield sites. We were all, apart from obviously the two larger towns, constrained to some extent in the sense that it's all green, a lot of greenfield development will be required. I'd like to see a breakdown of how much is expected to be on brownfield as opposed to greenfield.
Thank you. Extensive list of, I think, all the major strategic issues in the field. Adrian.
Thank you, Chair. I just was really struck in that presentation by the graph with the lines going up, the 3 lines, and also the earlier one, which was very dramatic. I loved the way you showed us the graph and then showed us the graph again with all of the information. And that was a real emperor's no clothes moment, wasn't it? I quite often think about what level of development people in our county are used to, and then how psychologically they deal with something which is twice as high, which they've never experienced in their lifetimes. So I wonder how that will actually play out in reality, but also about the gearing that's necessary between houses, which we talk about numbers of houses quite a lot, and the amount of workforce that you need to deliver that, and then the step behind that, which we've seen referred to, of infrastructure and people to work in that infrastructure. Now, it may well be that the people arrive with the houses and the infrastructure, and it all fits together. But there's a whole set of gearing questions there, aren't there? About when do things arrive, when do people arrive, when do things start working, and it feels to me as if workforce probably is a key bottleneck there, because you have to get the workforce in before you have the accommodation for them. So I feel as if I'm struggling to shape that into a question, but can we talk about that for a short while, please?
Well shaped. Okay, so we've got affordable versus social market rent definitions. The constant elephant in the room of the new town for Hertfordshire, infrastructure front loading, so it actually gets delivered, and I guess outlawing outline applications, and the brownfield percentages, and then Adrian's point, that psychology behind or preparing people for what to expect when we build high, and of course the workforce gearing point, which is something that Peter, Frew and myself raised with the Minister when we met with her recently under the rubric of the Growth Board. So, Colin, do you want to reflect on any of those now, or?
I'll have a go on a few of them if that's all right. So last year, 66% of what we built was brownfield. So that was better than I expected, I have to say, but you would presume that number is going to go down. We will be building more on greenfield in the future, particularly things like Gilston and in time Hemel Garden communities will be large greenfield sites. So that number will probably decline unless we can keep churning brownfield land. The government's very keen on gentle density, so are we building medium-sized blocks of flats in town to keep that number balanced? The psychology of higher housing targets is a good one. I guess the answer to that is, can you demonstrate to those communities that life has become better? There are better services, there are they can travel easily, there are nice community centres and schools, and that might be the way for people to see the benefit of growth, but it's definitely a difficult challenge. Detailed planning applications, I'll have a word with the government, but that's the system at the moment that, I've heard it so many times, developers come in with an outline, change it. It's not what was first proposed to the community. They are frustrated that where the conversation started is nowhere near where it ended up. So recognise your point. Building workforce, I've booked us all onto a bricklaying course after this, so that's the way we will have enough of us. But it's a very valid point. We could allocate all these sites, we can grant all these planning permissions. Does the development industry want to build that fast? Does it change their model? And do we have all the things we need to do that, the materials, the workers, etc.? So we're not going to hit that purple line next year, clearly, but the line getting up to it, we might gain all of that capacity as we go, as the industry gears up to it.
Great. Thank you, Colin. I'm just looking at Julie, Daniel, Paul, any final words on this one before we move on to the next mission? Thanks.
I might just say a couple more things for context more. I think particularly picking up what Stephen and Adrian said. Yes, that graph that says that houses weren't affordable 20 years ago, and now they're twice as unaffordable as before. And I hope you do the maths and play with percentages. GCSE level maths or A-level maths will give you a different answer. But 20% reduction in a house price today it's not even going to get close. It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing that if any politician, I don't think they do in this room, says, well, we're building more affordable houses, so we're tackling this problem. It doesn't come close to tackling it in this area. So we need to recognise that. And that immediately flips us, as you say, to social housing and the work with homes. And that goes back to the point that Colin made, but I made in the discussion meeting about it all comes down to money. It's the same with design as well. I do like playing around with numbers for context, but in our area, we share with Adrian, we've got Hemel Garden communities, deliver about 10,000 homes. There's various estimates, the amount of infrastructure investment that will come with that. We get a number of $750 billion, which doesn't include any of the housing and indeed the cost of the social housing in that. 10,000 houses. We've got to do 250,000 houses. 25 billion of investment has to come into this one county of 1.2 to 1.3 million. Somebody's got to look seriously at those numbers, and there's going to be an awful lot of pension funds that are going to have to be heavily encouraged to actually put the money in for those schemes if that money's ever going to be there to match up. Going back to Stephen's point, the infrastructure. I don't think it's going to come from the private developers alone, for sure.
Thanks, Paul. We need to move on. We have a recommendation. It's paragraph 2.1 that the board support the proposed next steps for the topic expert group as set out in section 8 of the report. In classic local government style, if you go to section 8 of the report, it will refer you to appendix number 4, which I presume everybody has read in detail. So can I ask members of the board if they are happy to approve that recommendation? We'll take that as agreed, and we will now move on. I think we've picked the two really meaty discussions for today's deep dives to healthy and safe places. At this point, I just wanted to note that the reason Donna Nolan isn't with us this morning and has sent apologies is that she's actually at a meeting of senior figures in NHS UK presenting on this mission. So it seems we've become somewhat of an exemplar already. You've all had the paper on this in advance, updating on progress and setting out plans for next steps. Paul, are you present? Over to you.
Right, thank you very much. And we're going to have a bit of a double act between myself and Ben Martin. And I think what I want to do first is just sort of set some of the scene. So I'm just going to make sure the slides are working. That's good. So what I want to start with, but just really saying, I think it's really rather good that we've had the discussion about housing followed by this discussion. These two things are so inextricably linked. And whether we achieve the 10,000 or approach the 10,000, being clear about how we deliver healthy places is a really critical part of both mitigating potential harm that might arise from that development, but also actually creating the environment which was described just now, which is one in which people feel that they are getting something back from all of this change, that they actually are getting services and improvements as well. It's worth just saying, in terms of the mission that we have, that was agreed by this board last year, that our goal really is very much looking to ensure that Hertfordshire residents and communities actually do benefit from neighbourhoods that are designed and regenerated from the perspective of their physical health, their mental health, their safety and their social connectedness. But in a way, health starts a long time before illness. Starts in our homes, starts in our neighbourhoods, starts in our schools, starts with our jobs. And this presentation and the focus of the mission is very much on health rather than focusing on ill health and how we maintain health rather than needing to treat it. So why does this matter? Well, it matters across this county because of the disparities in health across the patch, whether that's in terms of access to safe walking routes, green spaces, physical activity, which does vary widely across the county. We also have, clearly, as we've been discussing, a rapidly growing population, pressures of housing that have been discussed just now, pressures on transport that we discussed at our last board meeting, and pressures on public services more generally. And there are environmental challenges as well. Poor air quality disproportionately impacts vulnerable groups, and there are gaps in our active travel infrastructure which do limit people's opportunities for healthier lives. So what are the missions? What are the goals of this mission? There are 5 that we've set out that really underpin the mission. They are very much about improving and regenerating places, embedding health and well-being principles in planning and in infrastructure, addressing inequalities and collaborating to ensure that health infrastructure actually does meet the needs of local residents. So we've got a number of actions that are set out in the report that you've got today. There are 8 in all that we are taking forward. And there's a particular focus within those 8 actions, which is around the development of the healthy place making framework that has been referred to already in the earlier presentation. I'm not going to go through and read each one of these items out. They're in the paper, and I'd like to take them as read. I do want to pick up one in a moment, which is on the second of the 2 slides I'm going to talk to, which is in relation to item 5, which is including the planned rebuild at Watford General Hospital. I think it might be useful just to update colleagues on where we are post the announcements by the Secretary of State on Monday. I think the first thing to say about the announcement on Monday is that more detail is emerging since Monday, and that detail is encouraging from the point of view of Watford General and the hard work that the team have been doing over many years to get to a point where we have a well-established, clear plan for re-providing a hospital on that site. The news is that the redevelopment will go ahead. Obviously, the Trust itself and the NHS family more broadly across Hertfordshire had hoped that we would achieve an earlier slot than the date that has been announced by the Secretary of State. But I think we all have to recognise some of the constraints on public finance that had to be taken into account. And what we do now have is much greater clarity about the programming and sequencing than the previous new hospital programme ever gave to us. So work on the scheme will be allowed to continue with enabling works proceeding and also the retention of the project team. Not every scheme in wave 2 of the programme, which is where Watford now sits, has been allowed to do that. So it's been identified as one of those that was very well advanced and really that advanced state of its plans, including the fact that it owns all of the site and is able to progress core enabling works, really is a key part of that. And all of this, I think, does ensure that were the opportunity to arise for an earlier slot to open up, that there will be an opportunity for the scheme to advance more rapidly. That may feel like we're clinging to a little bit of hope there, and I have to say that I recognise that and I can understand people's reaction to that. But I think I can see from the discussions that we've been having that there is actually a route to getting a hospital faster than the announcement on Monday, but we have more work to do to make sure that we keep ourselves very firmly in that slot going forward. But I just wanted to sort of cover that off and make that as a particular point in terms of these actions. I think one of the things that's very obvious from both the presentation on housing this time and the presentation on transport last time is that when you read these papers and look at the missions, there is a significant amount of interconnectedness and mutual reinforcing amongst the 6 missions. And this slide just tries to sort of articulate that in terms of how the other missions really lean in to support the Healthy and Safe Places mission, but also how the Health and Safe Places mission really does have a significant part to play in actually fulfilling some of the ambitions in the other missions. In terms of progress, maybe just to sort of talk through the progress we've made so far, I think there's a number of things we've done which really I think do mark quite an important level of progress in this area, and possibly why my colleague is presenting elsewhere today on this. First is we've done a really important piece of work around baselining the data and doing the necessary literature reviews, and that comprehensive review has provided us with a clear understanding of where Hertfordshire is and identified the best practice from around the country, but also globally as well, that we can draw upon in developing our Healthy Places framework. We've secured the funding, very pleased that the funding that's been made available to enable us to particularly take forward the work around developing that framework. And we also have been doing some work to think through how do we best engage with stakeholders, particularly elected members across the county, to really refine and ensure that the framework that we develop is one that is good to go, is really appropriate and practical and usable by local authorities right across the patch. Also, we've been doing some work to really try and move on with finalising the framework and developing, if you like, a first draft of that so that we can share that for wider stakeholder input. And I think what we're keen to do, and we will come to the end of this presentation and shortly where we would like to get some input on, how we make sure that the framework we develop is genuinely actionable and adaptable to local circumstances. Each of you will have a plan that is at a different stage in its development and in terms of the weight it has in the planning process. We're very keen that this is a tool that is a valuable way of you pursuing your goals as well. And the last piece really is about measuring success. We've got a clear set of metrics that enable us to gauge how we are moving in terms of improving health outcomes, increasing that access to green space, and so on. So a lot of progress and really good collaboration with colleagues from the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office as well to make sure that that safety aspect is weaved into this work, and we'll be very keen to test that out as the proposals are further developed. I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Ben Martin, who's the Associate Director of Planning.
Thank you, Paul. So I'm just going to cover a few slides here that help set some of the context around the work that we've been doing, particularly around sort of national context, local context, and then how that feeds into some of the challenges and opportunities that we've identified along the way. So as we've already sort of touched on earlier on in the meeting, as you're all aware, the new MPPF was published on the 12th of December last year, and quite rightly, a lot of the attention and focus was immediately on amendments to the standard methodology, but also issues around green belt and grey belt. But we shouldn't overlook the fact that the MPPF also provides a lot of national policy context support for creating healthy and safe communities. So in terms of what it says, we already had Section 8 of the MPPF on promoting healthy and safe places. There have been some amendments to this to strengthen in general areas, particularly highlighting their text, moving the emphasis more towards prevention above just simply planning for things later down the line. I think probably one of the more substantive changes to the MPPF brings in controls and greater controls around the placement of hot food takeaways. That's something that in Watford we had experience of when we had examination of our own local plan. We had to battle really hard to include a policy on that particular matter within our plan, and had we had this text in the MPPF, we would have been in a lot stronger position to argue for that policy. There's also some amendments within the MPPF as well around broadening out that definition of what health infrastructure actually means beyond just hospitals, but also that wider suite of infrastructure that can support better health. In terms of the local context, through the work we've been doing, we've also had a chance to look at how the work of the mission is aligning with ongoing work around planning, but also wider strategies being developed by other partners and how that can all start to be brought together to help deliver successful outcomes for the mission. We talked a lot around public health within HCC not being a statutory consultee for planning, but actually what we found was there are good relationships with that team and with a number of districts, and they have fed into local plans, and that's again something that in Watford we had specific experience of, where they helped us develop specific policies within our local plan to deliver good health outcomes and to deal with issues specifically around health. NHS is a statutory consultee within planning, and again that relationship needs to evolve and continue to be really important to the work that's done within planning. But then broadening things out, we recognise there was a number of other strategies that are being developed as well that could feed into the work that we're doing within the mission. So you've got the air quality strategy, health and wellbeing, a whole raft that are up on the slide. I won't read them all out, but really it's about bringing all of that good work together to help us deliver some successful outcomes as part of the work on the mission. So in terms of the challenges, I think a lot of these challenges, it's fair to say, are probably experienced by many of the missions. A lot of challenges, particularly at the moment around resources, but also, as we've touched on today, the changing landscape around planning policy and devolution. So trying to kind of navigate that while still continuing to progress the mission has been a challenge. I think we've touched on it a couple of times today. The one I would highlight from the slide here is that point around the timelines for local plans. And we've talked a bit about the potentially to embed some of this work into the planning policy process as more of a statutory document, whether that's informing policy within a local plan or whether it's supplementary planning guidance to follow. Clearly, those things don't all align because we are developing local plans to different timeframes. So how do we start to develop and bring forward work that can be embedded and layered in over a period of time rather than in one single hit? And then on the opportunities, again, I think just look broadly, a number of these opportunities talk to the fact that there is more collaboration. There is a lot of alignment that's going on with a lot of work that's going on elsewhere in Hertfordshire as well. So really important that we continue to look outwards as we develop the Healthy Places framework and start to bring some of that work in. And as we've talked about, the ultimate opportunity here is to deliver a set of healthy places standards, healthy and safe places standards, I should say, that can bring a degree of consistency across Hertfordshire. So we are dealing with that issue of inequalities that we might see when different areas are hamstrung by the fact that they have different policies and different levels of control over development that's happening within their area. So a real opportunity here for us to work together to have a consistent approach across Hertfordshire. And I think at that point I'm just going to hand back to Paul. Thank you.
To conclude by saying a little bit about next steps, and also just to pose a question into the room for maybe some discussion alongside any questions that colleagues might have. I referenced earlier on, and it's a really important part of our next steps, that we are keen to establish a member-led subgroup to be convened in January this year to help support the work that we need to do to get to a position where we have a document, a framework that is genuinely usable and adaptable to local circumstances. So that work's progressing. Also, we're looking to present further on this work around healthy places to the Hertfordshire Infrastructure and Development Board. I think it's really important to have the conversation there, as well as the emerging thinking around this develops further. We've secured the funding, for which I referenced earlier, and thank you very much for that. That enables us to go out and procure the external support we need to get the framework to a finished standard. And we have engagement workshops, which are really important to us to make sure that we are landing this in an effective way. And the work programme for 25-26 is under development, and that should be shared later. And I think we're obviously monitoring with considerable interest emerging government guidance and policies, and there have certainly been a plethora of those in recent weeks, and we need to take all of those into account as we take our work forward. I think the discussion area we're very keen to just sort of flag is to get colleagues' steer really at this stage about whether the framework that we're talking about is one that should be sort of formally embedded within the planning process, so has some material weight in determining planning applications, or whether it should be solely advisory. So how do we adopt and endorse a healthy place making framework? Do we take a formal approach? Do we take a voluntary approach? And I'm very struck by what Colin was saying earlier on about the links to the Development Quality Charter, how the learning from that in terms of how much it's gained traction with the developer community, and also the new emerging requirements around design codes and how that might play a part as well, and how this framework might inform those as well. So they're keen to get thoughts on that, and very happy to take any questions, Chair.
Thank you, Paul and Ben, for that very thorough presentation and for taking the initiative and putting a question to the board. Mark.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Paul and Ben, for that. It was interesting, Ben, you mentioned about devolution, and I just wondered how your thoughts are on that as a challenge, I think. Is it a help or a hindrance to you? Has much thought gone into it? And the other one was about opportunities, and we talked about AI previously, and I just wonder if there's any embracing of AI in the thinking and the challenges that come up. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks. Peter.
Thanks. I mean, just on the question, I think my preference would be for it to be formally part of the process. I think if it's advisory, then it's easy to be ignored. It won't come as a surprise to anyone in the room that I want to talk about Watford General. But, I mean, Paul, you said it was encouraging news on Monday. I've not met a single person who works at the hospital or a resident or anyone else who thinks it's encouraging to be told that we've got to wait until potentially 2034 for any construction to start on the site. I think there's a real danger that we just accept the government's narrative that there's constraints on public finance. I don't necessarily accept what the government are saying, but even if there is constraints on public finance, the announcement on Monday was that we were going to be placed 24th in the list of 40 hospitals. And I think we've got to ask some serious questions about why do we think that we should be so far at the back of the line when we've got a scheme there that's got land available, that's got outline planning permission, that's got better access, which the existing hospital's crumbling, and we've been told we've got tens of millions of pounds worth of work that's needed. So I don't think we should be labelling such an announcement as encouraging. As I say, the people that work at that hospital that I spoke to certainly don't see it as encouraging. And if we do accept the narrative that there's constraints on public finance, why do we think we should be near the back of the queue when it comes to the new hospitals programme?
Thanks, Peter, and thank you for your leadership on the issue around Watford General. I know for those of us that represent residents that are absolutely reliant on that hospital, it really is a live and pressing issue, and the further delays are incredibly disappointing. Richard.
Thanks, Jeremy. We've in Stevenage we've got a Healthy Places framework in our local plan, but I do think there's value in looking at this across the piece. I think it also makes sense to look at the alignment of the ICB strategy and the provision of health services at all levels, and for it to be a, I don't know how formal a relationship you can make it, but to make it a formal reporting body. And as mentioned in the earlier deep dive, I think it makes sense to utilise one public estate funding for public services, housing and regen. Thank you.
Thanks. So we've got Devo and AI from Mark. We've got Watford General from Peter and myself, really. And Richard's comments on adoption and possibly formal reporting.
Thank you, and thank you for those contributions. I'm going to, in a moment, ask Ben to say something about AI. That's the advantage of being the one who fields the questions. But just on the devolution point, and the question was sort of help or hinder, I think from the point of view, and I think this is more directed at how is the NHS viewing it at the moment. I think from that perspective, what I would say as the chair of the ICB is that I think our position at the moment is one of a watching brief, keen to lean in and support where that's appropriate. Obviously watching very closely, given that we straddle the boundary between Hertfordshire and Essex, what Essex is doing in terms of progressing, and very keen to properly understand what colleagues' thinking is across Hertfordshire in terms of how devolution might play out in this county. We're obviously also very interested in understanding how some of the potential risks that are associated with this might be managed, not least from our perspective, the interface with our colleagues in social care. As those areas of service might change in terms of how they're administered, we are keen to make sure that there's continuity of service for our residents. So that would be, I think, our main area of focus at this stage. But we're very keen to support in whatever way is appropriate to facilitate the change that is decided upon. In terms of Watford General, let me just say, I don't disagree with the word that Mayor Peter Taylor has said, and having watched the statement on Monday, my natural and first reaction was one of disappointment, like many other people. But my role as the chair of an integrated care board as part of the NHS is to find the way in which we can actually move this forward. And I think it's really important that we continue to have the support and challenge of our local government partners, because that public challenge and the things that our political leaders can say, that those of us who work within the NHS can't always say, is an incredibly important part of creating the right conditions and the right level of pressure to make sure that we get what we need, which is a new hospital for Watford. I think the last point is very much welcome the comments about a more formal approach to adoption, but I guess it's really important to get a sense of what the whole room's view is on that, so that we know quite how to pitch this document going forward.
Ben.
Okay, just very quickly, I think in terms of AI, obviously there's been huge strides in the sort of recent years, but also we know it's a moving feast. We are trying to develop a framework that has longevity, so I think it's something we're very much cognizant of, and it's something that could help us in terms of the process of developing the framework, but also it could be about how we inform development choices in the future as well. So I think it's something that we will look to embed as far as we can within the framework as we take the work forward.
Thank you, Jeremy, and I'm sure Peter and yourself wouldn't expect me to not mention Watford General, because that's the free side, shall we say. And of course, it's not just for Watford, it's for West Hertfordshire. And I'm incredibly disappointed. And of course, I don't necessarily think the long-term perspective has been looked at here. If we were to agree and indeed built the government's housing figures, in that period of time, there will be 24,000 new dwellings in those 3 council areas alone, let alone anything that comes along in St Albans. The other thing that I think needs to be equated here, and I recently had minor surgery in November in the 1920s part of the building. Although the service was incredibly good, my deputy leader was in there on Monday in a porter cabin having some heart treatment. Those buildings will not last another 9 years, so I wonder actually how much extra expenditure is going to have to be spent before we actually get the new build, and perhaps that does need a new piece of work being done. Actually, you could save an awful lot of the additional costs if you did it sooner. And I think it comes back to your point, Paul, in terms of pressing the government. This is actually a false saving deferring this.
Jonathan?
Thank you. I just wanted to, in that sort of context around health infrastructure, just raise a point around mental health beds. Not a high number in Hertfordshire at all compared to many other comparable counties, and I think that demand sadly will rise with the growth agenda. I see that very acutely in the data I see around the impact on police officer hours, about 1,000 police officer hours every single month, just looking after someone in mental health crisis, because the NHS isn't yet able to take the handover. We need to try and drive that figure down, but that's directly linked to capacity in the system, and so I just wanted to raise that in both the wider partnership infrastructure work and particularly thinking about future provision that I do think is important to be considered.
Okay, I'm going to get a Max, because I saw him first, then I'll squeeze in Ben, and that will be the last one in this section, I'm afraid.
Thank you. I will be brief, and I agree with Mayor Peter Taylor. I think something like this needs to be, in my opinion, formalised. I think if you do allow something to be voluntary, you're probably limited the number of people that would volunteer to take part in it. So in order of to provide clarity and kind of more of the feeling in the group, I'd just like to offer that as well. Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, tonight's clean air night, so it seems kind of this is particularly apt today. It's good to see the increased emphasis on prevention, tackling health issues. And I know from the county council figures that I think air traffic, traffic pollution in the air costs our health services in Hertfordshire alone, I think 100 million every year. Given that, and my limited experience that air quality action plans don't really have too much effect, I just wondered whether there's sort of a new opportunity for partnership working towards creating a way of making genuine differences across the county to the quality of air at traffic hotspots, because I think that's a very big deal for a lot of people here.
Okay, so with Stephen's comments on Watford General from the other side, we've got Jonathan's points on future provision, Max's comments on adoption, and Ben on the impact of air quality. I'm going to add a very brief final question of my own, if that's not abusing the chair, and it really does go back to this point about future provision, and the Watford General piece is a long-term element of it, but like a lot of the discussion we've had over the past 20 minutes, there is this interplay with the housing mission, and particularly the new housing targets, and it might be that this is more of an ICB specific question than a mission question, but I think it does relate to the mission, which is how can we as local authority leaders better engage or achieve better results from our engagement with the ICB on particularly property issues and locations for GP provision, because I know I'm not, for new additional GP provision, because I know I'm not alone amongst colleagues here when saying we feel that we are constantly both hitting a brick wall and talking in an environment of ever-shifting and ever-changing goalposts.
Okay, let me try and respond to all of those points. And I might look over my shoulder and ask Ben to pick up on anything I've missed as I go through. the points that Stephen's mentioned in his comments, absolutely take those on board, and those are certainly points that I think have been rightly made since the announcement on Monday. You're right, there will be significant costs in maintaining the existing buildings, and the further that is extended out, the greater those costs will be. So there is a very legitimate point to be made, and is very much part, I think, of making the case to advance to an earlier slot as one comes available. I think the points that Jonathan's made about mental health are well taken. Quite a bit of work's been done over the last 6 to 9 months to invest at the Lister to provide a new mental health crisis hub. That's already had a very material impact on mental health presentations into A&E departments, which is good for the individual, but also good for the staff and good for the patients, but also I think helps with some of the needs that our colleagues in the police service have as well. But very happy to take a conversation offline on that in terms of what else is still needed, and I know my colleagues at HPFT are very, very much focused on that. I think very grateful to hear another piece of feedback around the format and formality of the document, very helpful, and we can pick that up in the workshopping that we'll do in the next few weeks. I think the point about air pollution, air quality, I think that's one that will be useful for the group to take away and see quite where the opportunities are, particularly to align between NHS and local government partners, but undoubtedly there are significant costs to the individual and to health services that directly arise from poor air quality. And on the last one, I think probably what I would suggest is two things really. One, we have the presentation on healthy places at the Hertfordshire Infrastructure and Development Board, and we can make sure we pick up on some of that particular thread around the interface between the NHS and local government planning colleagues to make sure that there is that level of understanding of the difficulties on both sides, not least when it comes to being clear about what the developer is actually offering, how many strings might be attached to that offering, and how easy it is actually to access the funds to enable the development to be built in a way that is operationally effective from the NHS and also affordable and sustainable financially from the NHS perspective. So we'd be very happy to have a bit of that conversation in that context, and if it's helpful, to come back and have a further discussion here as well.
Thank you. Okay, we need to bring this item to a close. I think it's been an excellent discussion, and we have a specific recommendation to support the proposed next steps for the mission steering group, which are set out in section 8 of the report. Are members of the board happy to approve that recommendation? And I think at the same time we can also note for the minutes that, and people please butt in if I'm reading this wrong, but I think there is a strong sense of support around the room for a robust formal process around adoption of the plan. I'm seeing lots of nodding, so I think we should minute that, and hopefully that gives you the steer that you were looking for. Okay, before we move on to the budget and advocacy-related items, a mention of student accommodation earlier jogged my memory that I was very remiss at the beginning of the meeting not to welcome Professor Wendy Wills as Pro-Vice-Chancellor of University of Hertfordshire. I think for a while, a number of us felt that having the university properly integrated into the governance of the Growth Board was really like a missing piece of the jigsaw. So although we did welcome you in your absence at the last meeting where you were very ably represented by your deputy, it's wonderful to have you here in person with us today, Wendy, and we're all looking forward to working with you across the 5 missions in the future moving forward. So welcome again.
Thank you.
And from that, straight on to our proposed Growth Board draft budget for 2025-2026 financial year. You've all received the paper providing the update on the budget with the budget proposals for next financial year, and this also includes the proposed staffing cover arrangements, temporary arrangements for when Faru, as our current Director of Growth, leaves us at the beginning of next month. So, Faru, over to you to take us through the budget recommendations, please.
Thank you, Chair. So the report that you've got in your pack at agenda item 7 summarises the budget position in terms of what is expected to be spent this financial year and what we're proposing in terms of the budget for financial year 25-26. So as of budget position at the end of December, what we're expecting is spend of around 593k. So this is slightly less than what was anticipated, and that's partly as a result of mission development funding not being fully committed or spent this financial year, and we're proposing to roll the majority of that over into the next financial year, where you'll see a slight increase in the spend that's proposed. Just in terms of key deliverables, just to highlight a few of those, hopefully you'll be familiar through the mission development deep dives that we're doing, but as you will all be familiar, some of the kind of key things that we've delivered over the last financial year include supporting Herts Futures on the launch and rollout of Invest Hertfordshire. So that was our investment prospectus to the development sector, which we launched at UK Reef. We've awarded a number of contracts to support the delivery of high-speed internet connections as part of Project Gigabit, which is being delivered through our digital mission. And in terms of the Sustainable County Mission, we've awarded some funding to support the local area retrofit accelerator, and that project is underway to deliver a retrofit strategy for Hertfordshire by the end of this month. The development charter, whilst we haven't seen as much success from that as we'd like, that was one of our kind of key documents that we launched last year, and we'll be looking to the kind of how we align that to the work of the Healthy Places framework, looking ahead, as Colin and Paul have outlined. And then, of course, the Herts Infrastructure Development Board, again, lots of work that we're doing with the development sector more broadly in terms of, trying to work much more closely with the development sector to support our priorities, but also in helping to shape how we deliver good growth across the county. And an annual report summarising deliverables more broadly will be presented to the Growth Board in March this year. So looking ahead, in terms of the budget that's proposed for financial year 25-26, it's outlined paragraph 3.2 in the paper. Partly, as I say, the increase relates to rollover of funding for the mission development money and a slight increase in salaries to take account of inflationary increases there. In relation to the proposed staffing arrangements from the 10th of February, to avoid a gap in staffing owing to lengthy recruitment processes, but also looking ahead in terms of future funding uncertainty and the role that we want the Growth Board to play, particularly as we consider the devolution white paper and the outcome that Hertfordshire takes forward as part of that. We're not looking to backfill a permanent or fixed term position at this point in time. This will allow for greater flexibility and consideration of policy direction set by government, but also how the Growth Board itself wants to kind of take the Growth Board forward as part of that in its consideration. What we're proposing is that we have interim arrangements in place until spring this year, where that will be revisited with members of the Growth Board, and we're proposing that the work of the Growth Board is led by the Director for Economy and Skills at HCC or the Chief Exec of Herts Futures, my colleague Neil Hayes, with support from his Head of Advocacy and Communications, and that will give you a full-time equivalent in terms of driving forward the actions of the Growth Board in terms of mission delivery, but also supporting the comms, the engagement, the partnership work that we've kicked off this year. And the remaining Growth Board team that's supporting the management and the programmes and the governance will continue and report into Neil. So subject to agreement by the Growth Board, we're proposing that those staffing arrangements are in place by the 10th of February Further detail on the budget itself is set out in the appendices, and I'm happy to take any comments or questions.
Thanks, Faru. Any comments on either the budget proposals themselves or the proposed interim, very interim staffing arrangements? Richard.
Thanks, Jeremy. Yeah, I support the proposals as Faru's outlined. Given, I hate that every sentence I'm saying these days is Devo LGR, that we consider the review of the Growth Board and the funding as a matter of urgency. Certainly so that we are signalling to government that we can play nicely together. And I just want to take the opportunity to thank Faru for all her work, leadership and direction on the Growth Board. Certainly a great help to me when I became leader 2 years ago. And I'm pleased that the Growth Board have agreed a parliamentary reception in your honour, Faru. And I'll see you there.
Actually, on her leaving day, so it's very much a... further comments, Peter?
Yeah, I'd echo Richard's thanks to Faru for her work. One thing that has been, I think, a kind of cause of confusion perhaps amongst stakeholders and residents and others is the difference between what was the LEP, now Hertfordshire Futures, and the Growth Board. I'm just conscious that this proposal kind of means that we've got a shared officer resource working for both Hertfordshire Futures and the Growth Board. Do we think that there are any issues around kind of clarity about the distinct role of those two organisations, given that we'll then have a shared officer resource?
Thanks. Other comments, questions? I'll pass to Faru in a moment, but just to pick up on Peter's point, because it is certainly something that came up in the various discussions, and I think that it's very much one of those things that is both a potential weakness but also a potential huge opportunity. And at this stage, to thank Adrian in particular for ensuring that sort of Herts Futures has very much sort of been part of this collaborative conversation. And I think that I know the team and Neil himself will be acutely aware of the need to maintain the separate branding, identity and focus of each of the two institutions, whilst at the same time, I guess under the branding and labelling, it will also provide the opportunity to exploit what ought to be a natural alliance, a natural partnership and a natural set of synergies. Faru may want to add to that.
Yeah, no, I'd echo that. I mean, I think that there's a really kind of significant strategic opportunity here, because you've got the business voice led by Adrian and the Herts Futures team, and you've got the Herts Growth Board, which is mostly made up of the public sector leaders and our anchor institutions across the county. So there's a real opportunity there to think about how we bring together the independent voice of businesses alongside their priorities and the strategic priorities that public sector leaders are discussing in this forum. And I think that joint oversight can only strengthen how we are already working together. So I think there's significant opportunity there. And I think particularly with the growth agenda that we're leading here, the economic mission is so crucial to what the Growth Board is doing, and I think it's crucially important that our business leaders also understand how we are working together to support that growth, be it through our kind of housing, healthy places, digital access priorities. This should create a better space for us to further join that up. So I think this is a really welcome opportunity, and I'm hugely supportive of Neil, and I know he'll do a brilliant job working with you all and the team.
Great. Thank you very much. If there are no further comments on the budget proposals, the recommendations in section 2.1 of the report are that we approve the draft budget for next financial year as set out in paragraph 3.2, that we approve the proposal for interim staffing arrangements being put in place to backfill the HGB director as set out in paragraph 3.4, and that we note the current financial position with further work to be done to consider appropriate future funding arrangements from financial year 26-27 following the Growth Board review in late spring, early summer. Very much that final recommendation cognizant of the points that Richard has made about the way in which it interplays and intersects with our emerging strategy in relation to the devolution white paper. So are people happy to agree all of those recommendations? Good. Thank you. And we will now move on to agenda item 8. And Faru is going to take us through the plan, the advocacy, communication and engagement plan.
Great, thank you, Chair. So I'm hoping we will be able to click through the slides. Apologies. So I just wanted to share a kind of summary of a year in comms with the Herts Growth Board. So around this time last year, we came to the Growth Board with a proposal for our comms and engagement plan as part of our advocacy approach to help raise the profile of how we are collectively working together, but also to raise the work of the growth agenda that districts, county council partners are collectively delivering. And just in terms of a recap of our objectives, partly what we wanted to do is obviously amplify the scope and reach of what we're doing here, not just to our kind of communities, but also key stakeholders, government, both officials and at political level, as well as our local MPs. Looking at opportunities to integrate our growth messaging. So as we've heard today, there's lots of interlinkages between the different missions that we're leading on, and I think it's crucially important that we can communicate what those linkages are and how we're bringing it together. And I think also identifying opportunities to further amplify the work of our partners. So again, just using the University of Hertfordshire as an example, they launched their new campus not so long ago. Again, there was an opportunity for us to amplify that, raise awareness, and ensure that we're continuing to promote what we're doing here. Our channels, so we've used a range of different channels to help kind of amplify our messages. So in terms of what we're doing externally, we are engaging with local press. We have our own social media assets that we're using, as well as paid advertising and local press. And we've put a number of articles out over the past year to help strengthen reach. And then we have our own digital and internal channels as part of that. And just looking at the next slide, this is just some of the kind of drumbeat that we've managed to kind of put out in terms of the different work that we're doing across Hertfordshire. And there should be a mix of what we see across different parts of the county, different parts of what our partners are delivering and how that's hitting the different kind of missions and the messaging that we're trying to reach in terms of our audiences. And then moving on to the next slide, again, just a snippet of some of what we've seen in the local press in terms of the work that's happening here. If we move on to the next slide. Thank you. So social media has been our biggest success. So LinkedIn has been the kind of critical way in which we have reached the most traction in terms of communicating what we do and want to kind of continue that and help to amplify. And I think there's probably more we can be doing to support each other as part of that messaging. Again, if there are particular schemes or aspects of your growth plans locally, but also through our partners that you're delivering, that we can help to kind of further promote. Again, let's explore that. And then the next slide, again, just presents some of the kind of areas where we had quite significant hits. So there was a lot of interest in the change of the Growth Board chair when that happened, as well as University of Hertfordshire joining our board. Just moving on, in terms of what we're planning to do more broadly to strengthen our comms with government, but also local MPs. The Westminster event that we've organised for early next month is the first step in that opportunity. As we all know, we've had lots of change here locally in terms of new MPs, and this is a really important opportunity for us in terms of being able to kind of raise awareness of what we're collectively doing, but also land some really important messages about the growth potential that we see here, but also, as we've heard today, some of the kind of challenges that could hinder or impact our growth potential if we don't have the support that we need from our local MPs to help champion some of those messages, but also critically our businesses who are here and want to stay here but need the kind of support and commitment from us all as well as government to make it easy and good to do business in this county. So the purpose of next week's event, we'll be having some opportunity to showcase and promote what we're doing. We'll have some speaking notes from Councillor Newmark and Mayor Peter Taylor, as well as Councillor Richard Roberts. We'll also have two business leaders, so Sky Studios from Elstree, they'll be speaking, and they'll be really kind of looking to land the importance of the film screen industry, not just for the county, but for the southeast, for the country, and they're also primed to kind of send a few messages to our MPs about how they can champion the sector and crucially what we're doing here. We'll also hear from a business leader who will be talking about the pharmaceuticals and life sciences industry. So we have UBS, who will be talking about some of the work that they've been doing here, the importance of that collaboration with the public sector, but again, really kind of pushing those messages to MPs around helping to champion what we're doing here, the sector, and getting those messages across to government. In terms of next steps on this, we discussed making sure that leaders in particular and partners of the Growth Board have some aligned messaging. So if we move on to the next couple of slides, so that will be coming round to you all ahead of the event. I'm really pleased to say that we are massively oversubscribed. We've got 10 out of 12 MPs confirmed. We do have a minister confirmed, and 80% of those invited are businesses. We've got various lords attending as well with interests in investment. So it's a real important opportunity for us all in terms of helping to network, but also again continue to land those messages in the conversations that will hopefully happen after we hear speeches. So I will send round the full confirmed list to members of the Growth Board so that you have that in advance alongside the messaging that we said we would share to support you all, and happy to take any comments, questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks. Any comments or questions on the advocacy and comms plan? No, in which case the recommendation is simply to note that report. Members happy to do so. Thank you very much. Item 9 is other part 1 business of sufficient urgency to warrant consideration. There is none. The date of the next formal meeting of the Growth Board will be on Wednesday, the 16th of July 2025. I have messages coming to me from both directions to tell me critically to remind everybody that there will be lunch served in committee rooms A and B across the corridor when the meeting concludes. If I could now, it's 29 minutes past 1, so incredibly we have not only finished on time, we've finished 1 minute early, but there is one more matter that we need to cover. If I can just ask officers to confirm that the webcast has been switched